Some horror films vanish from theaters and slip into oblivion for a reason. Others, however, deserve a resurrection, from obscure oddities to cult masterpieces that critics are still dissecting today. Stay tuned, because our number one pick might be the most visually stunning cult horror film you've never heard of. Grandpa's dusty attic has never unleashed a nightmare quite like this. We're unearthing 8 forgotten 1970s Grindhouse horror gems, the kind of movies that disappeared from the silver screen but refused to die in the memories of hardcore fans. Keep watching, because the final film on our list is almost too bizarre to believe it was actually made. The House That Cried Murder, 1973. We're opening this countdown with a film so obscure it's known under at least 3 different titles, and even genre historians disagree on which one actually stuck. The House That Cried Murder, also released as The Bride, follows Barbara, a wealthy young newlywed, who discovers her husband David in the arms of his old flame Ellen during their own wedding celebration. Rather than simply walking away, Barbara channels her rage and her father's money into an elaborate campaign of psychological torment, turning the couple's secluded countryside home into a slow-burning nightmare of threatening phone calls, unsettling surprises, and mounting dread. On paper, there's a genuinely intriguing premise buried in here. A scorned bride using wealth and patience as weapons instead of a knife feels like a fresher angle than most low-budget horror of the era attempted. And to its credit, the film does deliver a handful of legitimately unsettling moments, including a grim discovery involving a family pet that stuck with the small number of viewers who've actually seen this one. The isolated modernist house setting also gives the back half a genuinely eerie, off-kilter atmosphere that punches above the film's clearly minuscule budget. Unfortunately, the film takes far too long getting anywhere interesting. The pacing crawls through repetitive scenes of dread-building before the climax finally arrives. The central performances range from stiff to actively distracting, and the low-budget production values show in nearly every frame outside its strongest sequences. It's the kind of film that's more interesting to talk about than to actually sit through. A curiosity for Grindhouse completionists, rather than essential viewing. Let's move to a film that trades slow-burn dread for pure, unfiltered European sleaze. We're staying in the world of Italian Gothic exploitation for our next entry, and it's a film that trades slow-burn dread for something far more feverish and surreal. Nude for Satan follows Dr. Benson, who discovers a crashed car on a countryside road late at night, finding a woman hurt and unconscious inside. Seeking shelter, he brings her to a nearby castle, only to find a woman who looks exactly like his injured passenger already waiting there, setting off a hallucinatory night where doubles, doppelgangers, and dark secrets blur together into something closer to a fever dream than a conventional horror plot. Director Luigi Bazzella, working here under considerably more inspired conditions than some of his other genre efforts, leans entirely into mood and atmosphere over narrative coherence. The film has been described by genre fans as a dreamlike descent into Gothic excess, mixing bondage, torture, unmotivated sex, and an orgy sequence into a film dripping with eerie nightmare imagery. The old mansion setting is shot with a genuine sense of decayed grandeur, giving even the film's most indulgent detours a certain hypnotic visual pull that elevates it above typical low-budget Eurotrash. Where the film stumbles is in exactly the area its fans tend to forgive: coherence. Reviewers have consistently noted that the plot involves a man and woman confronting their own darker doubles, but the mechanics of how or why never fully resolve into something a viewer can follow with confidence, and pacing sags considerably in stretches that exist mainly for atmosphere rather than story. It's a film built entirely on mood rather than momentum, which makes it more of an experience to get lost in than a plot to follow. For viewers willing to meet it purely on those dreamlike terms, Nude for Satan delivers a genuinely striking piece of gothic excess that's outlasted its reputation as simple exploitation fare. It's messy, indulgent, and often makes little logical sense, but there's real visual craft underneath the chaos. From European sleaze, we're heading into something far stranger and considerably more American. Blood Freak, 1972. If you thought A Vampire Dog was strange, Blood Freak takes the crown for the single most bizarre premise on this entire list. A monster movie that somehow doubles as an anti-drug PSA, often within the same scene. The film follows Herschel, a Vietnam veteran who falls in with a woman entangled in the drug scene and gets recruited into a shady agricultural experiment involving chemically altered turkey meat. After eating the tainted bird, Herschel transforms into a lumbering, human-bodied creature with the head of an actual turkey and begins stalking addicts around town to drain their blood, the only substance that can temporarily return him to human form. What makes Blood Freak an unforgettable curiosity rather than just another cheap monster movie is its sheer, unfiltered sincerity. This is a film that periodically stops its own narrative so one of its co-directors can appear directly on camera, cigarette in hand, delivering an earnest, rambling warning to the audience about the dangers of drug abuse, seemingly unaware of how surreal that juxtaposition feels against a man in a rubber turkey head murdering people. The monster suit itself has become a piece of B-movie folklore, equal parts genuinely unsettling and completely absurd, and the low-budget, regional filmmaking style gives the whole production an unpolished, almost homemade quality that makes it feel like nothing else on this list. Judged purely as a competent horror film, Blood Freak falls apart quickly. The pacing is erratic, the acting is amateur across the board, and the anti-drug messaging clashes so violently with the exploitation elements that the film often feels like two entirely different projects stitched together. But as a piece of pure cult curiosity, it's genuinely unmatched, the kind of film that has to be seen to be believed and still doesn't quite make sense afterward. From a killer turkey, we're moving into considerably more refined vampire territory next. The Devil's Wedding Night, 1973. From a killer turkey, we're moving into considerably more refined vampire territory with a film that shamelessly borrows its structure from Hammer's classic Gothic horrors while adding a distinctly Italian layer of decadence. The Devil's Wedding Night follows twin brothers Karl and Franz Schiller, rivals in both temperament and ambition, as they separately pursue a legendary ring said to grant immense power, said to be hidden within the walls of Castle Dracula itself. Franz arrives first and is welcomed by the castle's new mistress, Countess Dollingen, the late Count's seductive widow, who uses the ring's power to lure young women to their doom so she can bathe in their blood and preserve her eternal youth. The film wears its influences openly, drawing heavily from Hammer's vampire pictures while injecting the kind of overt sensuality that Italian Gothic horror of the era was known for. There's a genuine visual elegance to much of the production, largely thanks to a real European castle location that gives the film a sense of authentic, decayed grandeur money alone couldn't easily buy, and the Countess herself makes for a memorably seductive antagonist, commanding the screen with theatrical menace. The bloodbath imagery and Gothic set dressing lean fully into the era's appetite for stylish excess, giving the film a handful of genuinely striking visual moments. Where it falls apart is coherence and pacing. The dual-directed production, reportedly reshot and reworked by a second filmmaker partway through, results in a story that often feels disjointed, with long, talky stretches of castle wandering between its more memorable set pieces. The plot mechanics around the ring itself remain vague throughout, functioning more as an excuse to move characters between scenes than a genuinely compelling driving force. It's a film that borrows its bones from better movies and doesn't always know what to do with them, but its atmosphere and Gothic sleaze have earned it a lasting spot in Euro horror conversations regardless. Zoltan, Hound of Dracula, 1978. From Gothic vampire royalty, we're heading into something considerably more theatrical and considerably sillier than anything else on this list. Zoltan, Hound of Dracula takes the vampire mythology this entire countdown has been steeped in and applies it with complete sincerity to a Doberman. The film follows Michael Drake, an unsuspecting descendant of Van Helsing living in modern-day America, whose family becomes the target of Zoltan, a resurrected vampire dog once loyal to Dracula himself, along with the gypsy servant who reawakens him. What makes Zoltan genuinely entertaining rather than simply embarrassing is how utterly committed the film is to treating its absurd premise with total gravity. There's no wink to the camera anywhere in the runtime. The film shoots vampire dog attacks with the same moody, atmospheric seriousness a filmmaker might bring to a proper Gothic vampire tale, and that unwavering sincerity is precisely what's kept it alive as a cult curiosity for decades. The infamous centerpiece, a vampire Doberman biting a human victim on camera, played entirely straight, has become the stuff of B-movie legend among horror fans who've stumbled across it. Where the film understandably falls short is basically everywhere outside its novelty factor. The pacing is uneven. The human characters are thin, and the film's attempts at genuine tension are constantly undercut by the fundamental silliness of its central threat, no matter how straight-faced the direction plays it. It's a film that exists almost entirely as a punchline, and to its credit, it's a genuinely memorable one. Zoltan earns its spot in the middle of this list, precisely because it knows how to be entertainingly bad without curdling into outright unwatchable. A balance several lesser films on this countdown never quite find. Malatesta's Carnival of Blood, 1973. Now let's shift from vampire dogs to a considerably more unsettling carnival setting, and a film widely regarded as one of the strangest, most genuinely dreamlike entries in all of 1970s American horror. Malatesta's Carnival of Blood follows the Norris family, who take jobs at a rundown, off-season amusement park as cover while secretly searching for their missing son, who vanished after working there. As they dig deeper into the park's decaying attractions, the family uncovers a nightmarish underworld run by the park's reclusive owner and his cadre of unsettling employees, including a vampiric manager, a hook-handed maintenance worker, and a rhyme-chanting performer who lures victims into deadly carnival games. What makes Malatesta's Carnival of Blood such a fascinating curiosity is how completely it abandons conventional narrative logic in favor of pure, disorienting atmosphere. The film leans into hazy, dreamlike visuals and surreal detours, giving off the sensation of wandering through a funhouse that never quite lets you find the exit, and several of its death sequences, including a genuinely startling decapitation, have stuck with cult audiences for decades despite the film's obscurity. The abandoned amusement park setting does an enormous amount of heavy lifting here, turning cheerful carnival imagery into something genuinely unsettling once night falls and the park's true residents come out. The trade-off for that atmosphere is coherence, reportedly hampered by a strained budget that left several scripted scenes unfilmed. The plot often feels fragmented and difficult to follow, especially in its opening stretch, and character motivations remain frustratingly thin throughout. This is a film built almost entirely on vibe rather than structure, which makes it more of an experience to sit through than a story to follow closely. Famously pulled from circulation after a poor initial screening and left largely unseen for decades, Malatesta's Carnival of Blood has since resurfaced as a genuine underground cult classic, and its influence on later surreal, atmosphere-driven horror is easy to trace once you know to look for it. From a rickety, sinister carnival, we're heading into a mansion full of the genuinely insane next. The Mansion of Madness, 1973. From a rickety, sinister carnival, we're heading into a mansion full of the genuinely insane, in what many consider the most visually accomplished entry on this entire countdown next to our final pick. The Mansion of Madness. Loosely adapted from Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, follows a young French journalist visiting a remote 19th century asylum, only to gradually discover that the patients have overthrown the staff and taken over the institution entirely, led by a physician who's allowed his charges to act out their most elaborate delusions as a radical form of treatment. This is the directorial debut of Mexican filmmaker Juan López Moctezuma, and it announces itself as something far more ambitious than typical low-budget horror, right from its opening scenes. The film embraces full surrealist excess, with lavish theatrical production design supervised by renowned surrealist artist Leonora Carrington, giving the asylum's inmates costumes and set pieces that feel plucked from a fever dream rather than a horror film. Tarot imagery, elaborate role-play among the patients, and a genuinely unsettling atmosphere of controlled chaos give the film a hallucinatory, art house quality that sets it apart from nearly everything else in the Grindhouse horror landscape of its era. Beneath the visual excess, there's also a pointed satirical edge, using the asylum's inverted power structure as commentary on authoritarian control that resonated strongly given the political climate the director was working under. Where the film occasionally loses viewers is pacing and narrative clarity, particularly in its middle stretch, where the emphasis on surreal spectacle sometimes comes at the expense of forward momentum. This is a film built for atmosphere and imagery first, plot second, which won't suit every viewer's taste. Still, for those willing to surrender to its hallucinatory rhythm, The Mansion of Madness delivers one of the most genuinely artistic and unforgettable visual experiences in all of 1970s horror. Which brings us to our number one pick, a film widely regarded as a genuine cult masterpiece.
Here to deliver you from evil.
A la Carta, 1977. We've reached our number one pick, and it's widely regarded as the pinnacle of Mexican cult horror, a film that critics and the British Film Institute alike have called a genuine masterpiece of the genre. Alucarda, loosely adapted from the Gothic vampire novella Carmilla, follows Justine, a teenage orphan who arrives at a remote 19th century convent after the death of her parents. She quickly bonds with Alucarda, another orphaned girl raised within the convent's walls, and their intense friendship takes a dark turn after the two encounter a mysterious stranger in the surrounding woods, unleashing a demonic possession that spirals into satanic ritual, vampirism, and violent religious hysteria among the convent's fanatical nuns. What separates Alucarda from every other film on this list, and from most of Mexican horror cinema in general, is the sheer artistic ambition director Juan López Moctezuma brings to every frame. The film moves at a relentless, almost hypnotic pace, layering grotesque, blood-soaked imagery with genuinely gorgeous cinematography and elaborate production design that feels theatrical in the best possible sense. Underneath its shock value lies a pointed, unflinching exploration of religious repression and sexual hysteria, using its convent setting to interrogate the church's treatment of female desire and autonomy, with a boldness that still feels striking decades later. The film's atmosphere of mounting dread and eventual full-blown chaos builds with genuine craft, culminating in a finale that's become legendary among cult horror circles for its sheer, unrestrained intensity. If the film has a weakness, it's the acting, which occasionally lands closer to melodrama than the material's ambition deserves. But that's a minor complaint against a film this visually and thematically accomplished. Censored and largely overlooked upon its initial release, Alucarda has since been rightfully reclaimed as one of the finest horror films to ever come out of Mexico, and it's the perfect film to close out our countdown of forgotten Grindhouse horror. And that closes out our countdown through 8 forgotten Grindhouse horror films from the 1970s. From the accidental comedy of a vampire Doberman to the genuine artistic mastery of Alucarda, this decade proved that even the strangest, cheapest, most overlooked productions could leave a lasting mark on horror history. These films rarely got their due when they first hit theaters, but decades later, cult audiences have kept them alive precisely because there's nothing else quite like them. Whether you're a longtime Grindhouse historian or just discovering some of these titles for the first time, hopefully this list gave you a few obscure gems worth tracking down. If you enjoyed unearthing these buried cult classics with us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there's plenty more forgotten horror history where this came from. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.